All right. Hi, Janet. It's lovely to see you here
Hi,
on
Richard.
this interview. And this has been a long time coming, hasn't it? Because since I've been here, very soon after I got inducted into Taunton Baptist Church, you went on a trip. Let's say that. And I thought, oh, that's right. Swan off on your holidays when the new minister turns up. But it turns out that it wasn't quite a holiday, was it? It was about your medical trip to Gaza. So we're gonna do an interview here. We were planning to do something at church where we were going to have a whole room full of people, and we're going to have a Q&A. We can still do the Q&A at some point in the future, because I'm sure that something like this will generate all sorts of responses, hopefully, and questions in people as well. And just want to encourage anyone who's listening to make sure that you make a note of those questions and feelings, because when we come back together, these are really important issues that we can discuss. So, Janet, you are a doctor here in Taunton, and you have been to Gaza and the West Bank, including Nazareth, which is in Israel, actually, just north of the West Bank, on multiple occasions, and Bethlehem, which is surrounded by that wall as well. So that's quite an experience. Why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are in your medical capacity and how you ended up going to Gaza?
Right. Well, I've been practicing medicine for a very long time now, and I had the opportunity a number of years ago to get involved with a Christian medical education group called Prime, whom Bob has done some work with as well. And I heard about them through him, actually. And they go abroad teaching, usually to Christian groups. And so I've been to Armenia a couple of times. And then the opportunity came up with Prime to try and do some work in Israel. So that was my very first trip, which was to Nazareth and Bethlehem. And I went for a couple of years because my specialty is palliative medicine. So that's looking after people who've got incurable, progressive, life-limiting illnesses. And so part of the role of going is not to go and do with patients, but it's actually going to teach healthcare professionals, be they doctors, nurses, pharmacists, whoever they might happen to be. And it's teaching them about palliative care and about end-of-life care, which in many countries that we go to is a bit of a luxury.
Yeah.
But it's you know, despite everything we've done in medicine, we've still got 100% mortality. And it happens to us all. We come into the world and we go out of the world. So that's where I've been going. And then the opportunity arose to go to Gaza as well, whilst I was actually over in the Middle East. Now, Prime doesn't actually go into Gaza because Gaza is noted as a war zone. So I went in with a group of people, doctors, who actually are all Christian, as it happens. And we went with Edinburgh University, who actually operate a global healthcare faculty.
Yeah.
And so,
Janet,
because
the fact that
Gaza's not a holiday destination.
No, it's definitely not. No postcards on sale. But just sorry to interject here, but was it a happy coincidence that they were all Christian, or is it because the appeal went out for Christian doctors to go, or what was
No, it was a happy coincidence.
Yeah, how
actually.
Funny. Yeah.
And I think a lot of Christians get drawn into palliative care.
Yeah.
Disproportionately.
That's funny.
So it just happened like that. But it was wonderful because when we've been abroad, when we've been teaching, we always start our day with some prayer.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll join someone in their room or around the breakfast table, but we will always start the day with prayer. And very often before we actually start teaching in the classroom, we'll just do a little huddle with a prayer.
Yeah.
And it's really good.
Fantastic.
Actually. It's marvellous.
So go back to the Edinburgh connection.
So that's the Edinburgh connection. So that's how you get in. But they've got to, and then you've got to apply to get into Gaza, to get permission from Israel, to get permission from Gaza. And so you've got to have a sponsor agency, really. And for a number of years, it was Medical Aid for Palestine, which is a very big organisation.
Yeah.
And then latterly, we've been for our entry, and all the permits have been facilitated by Palestinian Children Relief Foundation, which was set up in the early 90s. It's a states-sponsored group who try and bring children out for surgery. But in fact, they sponsor loads and loads and loads of visiting medics and surgeons and psychiatrists, and you name it. They sponsor about 140 groups to go into Gaza every year.
Goodness me.
And
profoundly
just
significant.
Absolutely amazing. There's a huge amount of NGO work going on.
Yes,
there.
So on the basis of the NGO work and all of these organizations and people going in, this seems like a perpetual sticking plaster, doesn't it? You can't sustain a small plot of land that's locked in like this, can you? So how did you feel when you went in for the first time, especially? Maybe even for the second or third time, but it must do something to you when you go into a place like that.
Well, I think it's the 13 years they've had the blockade.
Yeah.
And you approach the border across a bit of sort of just agricultural land on the Israeli side. And then there's just this huge building that you've got to navigate your way through. And then when you've passed the first hurdle and exited Israel, you then have to walk in through turnstiles. There's quite a technique for getting a wheelie bag through as well, which we've since learnt. And then you go through this sort of great big grey hole with huge metal doors that will slide closed. And then that means you're then in the interim place. And then you walk down this, or you can get like a golf cart or thing, but you can walk down this. It's like it's a covered concrete walkway, which is about 6 feet wide, and it's all fenced in.
Yeah.
With net, and you walk down this for about 1 kilometre, and then that takes you to the Gaza entry point, which is chalk and cheese. So it's Israel's, booths, uniformed people, all very spick and span, all the sentry people watching you. You'll just be
pure power.
Monitored, and then you get to the other end, and it's blue plastic chairs and people with fags and donkeys, and it's just amazing. Yeah. And then you've got to run the gauntlet of 2 more places to get through before you're actually into Gaza. And then when we're actually in Gaza, we were told very clearly there are places you go and places you don't go.
Yeah.
And first time there, we had a minder, so we shook him off eventually. But you just don't go wandering around. No. There are some routes you can take, but there's definitely some areas you do not go to.
You'd stand out.
I felt safe the whole time. Actually, I never had any concerns. But that could have been ignorance. But that was healthy. That was good.
Yeah.
I wasn't worried.
Yeah. That is a good sign, actually. Yeah. Going into a place like Gaza, I suspect it wasn't ignorance, because it's not as if your senses are not going to be alive, isn't it? But it's a different world. You are where,
it's a different world. And we've certainly, I've seen changes over the last 4 years. Far more vehicles. Thing that you saw donkeys with carts with whole families on the back and all their goods or whatever it might happen to be, and people just selling their goods on a blanket on the floor, and people buying vegetables and fruit, and actually the availability of fresh produce was surprising.
Yeah, that's very interesting as well.
Yeah, because there's quite a lot of agriculture there in that very, very small plot of land, which was 11 kilometres wide, and the border with so the westerly border and the northerly border with Israel is about 50 kilometres.
Yeah. It is the most densely populated piece of land on earth, isn't it?
2 million.
Yeah. Yeah.
In fact, I was so stupid once, because whilst we were there, there's this huge celebration that the 2 millionth person had just been born, this baby. Wow. And they were giving this baby a passport. Right. And the number on the passport was 2 with 6 noughts after, and I thought, that's wonderful. Yeah. And I thought, but it's a passport to nowhere.
Yeah, that's right. Oh,
it was just
Okay, so you get there, you get into this different world, and it's definitely not a holiday camp. A few surprises with the produce and that sense of not feeling under permanent threat or any threat at all. Yeah. And I'm guessing that they're used to a lot of groups like yours, because you mentioned the number of people coming in. It's not as if it's a novelty, is it? But it would still be new for you in that sense. Okay, so you're going there with the team. How long were you there for? And
About
on the
5
recent trip,
days.
about 5 days. And
About
tell us
5 days.
tell us what you did
Gaza.
when you were there, Janet.
But you get put in a hotel. There's only a couple of hotels that you do get put in, and you sit in this hotel and you think, well, it could be anywhere. I mean, it's just there's a sense of very, very surreal.
Yeah.
And then you just get minibused into the university, because we teach at the Islamic University of Gaza. There are two main universities there that do medical education. And the first time I was there, we had about 90 students, and they're just taking more and more. I think the class has now gone up to about 160.
Wow.
And
Good
these are bright kids.
Yes.
These kids, they don't drink, they don't smoke. Most of them don't exercise. There's precious little diversion for them. They work hard. They are the top 2% of the grades. They're clever kids.
Yeah.
They speak at least 3 languages.
Yeah. So you go in. You're effectively doing a bit of teaching with these guys.
We do quite a lot. We're teaching them. We're teaching about palliative care, and the thrust of our teaching is to show them a different style of learning, because a lot of their teaching is very didactic.
Yes.
So the teacher and they listen. But we try to do a lot more interaction, question and answer, and breaking them into small groups. We actually do a little bit of what we call simulation or role play, experiential learning, trying to get them to imagine what it might be like.
Yeah. Janet, just very quickly then, because we're used to that to a certain degree in our education system, from primary school upwards, this kind of back and forth interaction. Feel free to ask any questions. There are, sometimes you get teachers saying there are no stupid questions, but we know really secretly that there are. But that's beside the point. What do you think? What was the impact on these guys who have come out of an education system that doesn't, as far as we can tell, doesn't allow for any of that? What's the impact? What's the response like from these guys?
Well, over the years, it's actually got much easier, because I think they're starting to sort of teach a little bit like that, their tutors as well. But initially, they're very, very, very reticent and very quiet and very shy. You've always got the gabby ones that sit on the front row, but generally, very, probably feel very vulnerable, actually. So we because we've got maybe 4 or 5 tutors going, we can break them into small groups.
Yes.
And the other thing, of course, which is different between West Bank and Gaza, is that the girls and the boys, we were the only undergraduate group that taught girls and boys in a mixed classroom. All their other teaching is done in separate sex groups, which is really interesting. And when we broke into small groups the first time, we actually put them in mixed groups, and that didn't work. And subsequently, we put them in single sex groups, and it's worked much better.
That's very interesting.
It's very, very interesting. Whereas on the West Bank, the girls and the boys they're freely associating.
Yeah. It's very interesting. When I lived in Egypt, we noticed that the education was similar to how you just described it. It was a learning by rote. The schools did shift patterns starting at something like 7 o'clock in the morning, big batches of kids coming in. You'd hear the repetition of the chanting through song and through story. And it is a different way to learn. And it seems to be what they do. When I taught on the Bible school, it was very interesting. It seemed that the general Middle Eastern mindset wanted to be told answers. So when you're talking about things like theology or answers that are complex in the scriptures themselves, that don't require black or white, yes or no, you find yourself naturally engaging in a back and forth and a dialogue, even though they wanted a yes or no. Because it fits the system. It was very interesting for me to discover it the hard way. That's in that sense. But once you gave permission to say, no, this is good. I want you to be asking questions. I want you to respond to the response that you're given, and you just see the life coming back. It's incredible. So much better than just yes, no. This is what you learn. This is how you learn it, and this is the end of it. And then you go out and be an adult. It's a very ingrained pattern, isn't it, of education that I think the internet is unlocking a little bit, but your example there is doing the same.
I think one of our roles was to try and help them to apply their head knowledge and help it become heart knowledge, because they're very, very, very good. Even the third and fourth years, their knowledge, their book knowledge was amazing. But and we sat in on one of these examinations, we call them OSCEs, where they do these examinations, and one of them was to test their communication skills.
Yeah.
Well, we were just sitting in on these to give them some feedback, but it was a joke. Actually, what happened was that you had a patient, a student patient, playing the role of it, and this sort of doctor having to take student doctor having to take a history, and they asked lots of questions, which were all yes/no answers, and then they had to give them advice about how to use their inhaler. Well, it was just a lecture for 10 minutes, and the funny thing was that the patient, simulator patient, was yawning and at one point fell asleep. And this student doctor was still talking. And actually the examiner thought this was great. He thought you covered all the facts.
Oh, interesting.
The fact, the point that the patient, in inverted commas,
is lost somewhere in it all.
Any of that information, didn't hear any of it because he was asleep. Didn't even matter. He'd been given the information, ticking the box.
Yes.
So our role is very, very much and that's what Prime is about, putting the person back into medicine.
Yes.
They're very, very good at all the facts, but we're trying to put the humanity into it.
Yeah.
And sorry, I'm talking a lot. But at one point,
that's why we're here.
When we get feedback at the end of it, it's just wonderful. We get them to write up on the whiteboard what they're going to take away from this. And it's often, I now understand why I need to ask this person about their family.
Yeah.
Because if somebody's sick and they can't work, what happens to their family? What happens to their kids? What happens to their wife?
And in a place like Gaza, that is life or death.
Absolutely. And they'd never even dreamt of asking about their family.
Yeah.
So it's just taking the blinkers off from the physical, which they're all really good at, and actually looking at the person, the whole person. Yeah,
that's absolutely fantastic.
And it's just wonderful to do that and work on it, and you can just see them.
Well, that's what I was just going to say. It's wonderful because that's how you're wired. You love it when people get that connection between, okay, you're a medic, you've got to have the knowledge, but also it's a personable thing, and every individual is different and responds differently, has different circumstances. Yeah. I think that's absolutely brilliant. How come you ended up going to Gaza with this organization, Janet? Because there are plenty of other places that you could have gone to. What's the story there?
Oh, well, really, because Gaza's in there, isn't it, with the West Bank and Israel? It's you can't really separate it.
No.
So because one of the people who had done some palliative care, and I've worked with her before, she'd actually been into Gaza before, and she needed a team, and I just heard about it, so I said, "Yep,
brilliant,
count me in." I think there's something about going. There's that element in me that just wants to go somewhere that is a bit different, where it's not easy to get in. Whereas in Israel, what's really interesting is when you come out of Israel, well, you go into Gaza through the Erez crossing, because that's where the NGOs go in through, and the health people coming out to get to hospital come out there. But when you then come out of Israel through Tel Aviv at the airport, you have this cross-examination after you've checked in order to get out of the country. And every time I don't lie about it, I say what I'm going to go and do, but every time they cannot understand why we're going to Gaza. And last time this woman was saying to me, well, why don't you teach in Israel? Well, I said, but you've got the most amazing healthcare in Israel. You don't need us.
What a funny response.
She just couldn't understand it.
No.
Fascinating.
It is fascinating. So you extended that work out into Bethlehem and Nazareth. Nazareth is in Israel, but it's the most Arab populated. By Arab, we must make the distinction. It's not just Muslim, it's Christian and Muslim and Israeli.
Yes.
So you're amongst the highest populated Arab city in Israel. How how did that compare? Did you go there straight after Gaza or separate trip?
Oh, I've been to same trip. Been
Same
to
trip.
Israel a number of times,
Yes.
Nazareth a number of times, because there's Edinburgh Medical Missionary Society Hospital there.
Fantastic.
Which
Wow.
was established in the 1800s.
Yeah.
So I've been there a number of times, because there's a lovely Christian palliative care nurse specialist called Hanan Margier, who leads palliative care in the hospital. And so really a lot of the time we go to support her.
Yeah.
And this last time actually we met the new medical director, who is just on fire for Jesus. And he's a high flying, spent loads of times in the States, and he's come back to Nazareth, which is his home.
Nice.
And it's his roots.
Yes.
And it's absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
They're putting, Jesus has always been at the center of that hospital, but it got a bit lost.
Yeah.
And there's a chapel in there as well, and they're doing lots of posters, and they've got biblical texts, and they're really putting Christianity back into that hospital now.
And what sort of impact is it having on the town? How well is it received in the town? Is it a public service? Is anybody able to go? Or do they have insurance?
It's private public. They have got funding from the government, which has recently come on board. There's an Italian and a French hospital there as well.
Yeah.
And just outside of Nazareth, there's a big government hospital. It's all quite difficult, because if you've got private services, you want to keep them because you've got to get money to fund all your other services. So working together, I think they're slowly starting to work in a more cooperative manner. Yeah. And do specialties themselves.
Do you think you've got another couple of trips left in you?
Well, I hope so. But
well, under the current circumstances, admittedly, but you'd still like to go back. I'm just
trying to think now, actually, how because Prime is trying to think how we can do things virtually. Yeah. And I think we need to, because I've also been party to helping support a simulation suite that has been funded by the States in Bethlehem University, where they do nurse training, and they're trying to set up as a West Bank specialist place for doing simulation training. And I've been out there with some simulation teams, and it's how to maintain that. Yeah. To maintain that connectivity when we can't visit.
Janet, I know that this is probably slightly beyond the medical and teaching remit that you have, but the Gaza situation is it's unsustainable. Even though I think a lot of people would be quite happy to keep it in the background or forgotten completely, which is also awful. I think it was Nelson Mandela said that our global freedom is not complete. And he's talking about South African freedom, but he said something like, our freedom is not complete until there is freedom for the Palestinians, which includes Gaza and the West Bank and so on. And I just think if someone like Nelson Mandela, who knows what separation is like and the evils of racism and second-class citizenship and so on, he made the direct connection. Desmond Tutu makes the connection too. John Stott makes the connection that this is completely unacceptable and unsustainable. But I guess you're not looking to keep going back with your teams indefinitely. You want to see Gaza become a self-sustaining society that honors human life. And there's a whole other load of rabbit runs we could go down with that, admittedly. But what do you see, given your experience going there and your medical expertise and so on, and the people that you've met? What is the answer? What's the solution to this horrendous situation that has been created?
I don't know.
I knew you'd say that.
I have absolutely no idea, because the people I meet seem to be very reasonable people. Yeah, I know. They just want to earn a living. They want to practice their specialty. Most of the young people there will not get jobs after qualifying because their hospitals can't afford them. The only thing they can do is try and be the top 10 in their year and get sponsorship and move abroad. Yeah, which is what they do. So they lose all their best people as well. Absolutely. I don't know, but whilst these people I'm teaching aren't radical, they're just ordinary human beings who want the best. Yeah. I don't know. It's this that unfortunately there's a huge desire from small groups within the Palestinian group to annihilate Israel.
Yeah.
And until there is an agreement between them all, then I can't see the situation changing.
Which it's almost self-serving, isn't it? If you treat people like they are in an open prison, which is effectively what Gaza is, you do create hostility and anger, irrespective of what Hamas are trying to do, don't you? So even though that might be their political rhetoric on the public stage and on the global stage or the regional stage, most people, like the ones that you've met and the ones I've met, they're systemically and generationally locked into a fruitless, barren life, aren't they? That generates its own sort of rage, I would imagine. Well, it does. I know it does. So one serves the other, doesn't it, in that sense? And that's why I found it. Because as you know, I did my master's research paper was on the whole Israel-Palestine conflict and its history, and then a theology of land and all of that kind of work. And I got to the end, and I was being asked at several points, how are you going to conclude? What's going to be your reasoned and obvious and logical suggestions and your conclusion? And I, like you, Janet, I said, I both sides need to step back. Both sides need to take the heat out of their language and their actions, and both sides need to rehumanize each other for a start. And it was very interesting because I wasn't particularly interested in this until a few years ago, but a few years before that, I had an experience where we were watching the news and there were some, Israel were responding to some bombs and there was just this horrendous carnage. I think Lebanon were involved at this point as well, mid-90s or early 90s. And I made a comment about the disproportionality of the response. And I would have done it if it was anywhere in the world. I had no interest as a young Christian even then. I didn't even understand the situation. But the person who heard me said, I won't have anything bad said about Israel. And I was like, what? You're going to have to rip up most of the law of Moses, almost all of the prophets. You're going to have to blank out most of what Jesus said when he called out the Pharisees. And so then I remembered that little conversation, and then I did my research paper. So that's the kind of, for me, that's where my interest comes in. And then you start meeting Palestinian Christians and the Palestinian church. And it's like, these are super lovely, but not just the Christians, and the Muslims that you meet too. But we were going in as Christians on one of the groups that I went in to do some house rebuilding, and amazing people, amazing strength of character, amazing fortitude.
Yes.
And then 4 years ago, I met a Palestinian Baptist pastor. I wasn't going to say that. I wouldn't say his name. And this is at the Houses of Parliament prayer breakfast that we had, where I went from Torbay with our MP, who's a Christian. At least I don't know if he's the MP now, but he was a Christian. And this guy, this Palestinian Baptist pastor, was one of the speakers, and he was amazing. The courage, the strength of character, the fortitude, the determination to bring hope and life and love was absolutely inspiring, which made me want to keep advocating for peace and justice. Yes. I just want to read what he said, because it ties in with the whole situation. And then I'm going to ask you, Janet, as we close, have you got anything else that you want to add that you've remembered or that you want to say? But this is what this Palestinian Christian said, who spoke at the Houses of Parliament at the prayer breakfast. When he was asked, what's your response? I think I might have even asked it, I can't remember. What do I say, he said, working between Islamist extremist Hamas on the one hand and the illegal Israeli occupation on the other? Forgive, I say. Forgive and love by the power of Jesus. It is the only way. Yes, that is what I say. The whole room, and it was the big old chamber, it went completely quiet. It was magnificent response. It's exactly the Christ-like response, wasn't it? And I just think that's the answer, isn't it, in some ways?
Well, I think it is the answer, because man has actually failed miserably to create any solutions.
Yeah.
They're all man-made solutions, but in fact,
they don't work. They're not holding.
they're not holding until people find forgiveness in their hearts, and they seek an agenda which is not that of power and control over other people. Then there will not be peace there.
No.
And fear is driving this. Yes,
fear of the other, the alien, the foreigner.
Yes. And until people can feel safe. And I think it's a basic requirement, isn't it, to feel safe? And these people are not. No, the Israelis aren't either.
No, but it perpetuates, doesn't it?
They're all living in fear.
There is a wonderful Christian ministry that gets young teenage Palestinians and Israelis together. Then they go out camping, and the groups are very carefully coordinated to include equal numbers of male, female, and Palestinian and Israeli or Jewish Israeli or Arab Israeli even. And they say these guys become lifelong friends almost without exception. And I think, oh my goodness, that's training another generation to rehumanize, isn't it? The other, the one that we have demonized for years. Okay, so that's a good little sort of conclusion really to the whole thing. Do you want to add anything else, Janet, that stands out, that kind of comes to mind, or are you?
I think it's just that it's a real privilege to go in and to teach medicine.
Yes.
Because it's non-political.
Yeah.
And what we're actually talking about is relationship.
Yeah.
And despite we're not proselytizing, but we say we're Christian, that we're followers of Jesus, and they see from the way we role model teamwork between us. And we are a mixed team as well, of mixed sexes. So they see that there isn't the hierarchy. So the men in the group are not necessarily we take different leads in different times. So they see that, because it's a very hierarchical society.
Yes, well. It is hierarchical, and it is patriarchal. And that's something that causes the average Westerner to go, what's going on here? But actually it's another culture, and it's and it works there, and there are these differences.
Well, that's, I think that's for another day.
Well, it is, yes, for another day. I don't know how long we've been talking for now, but Janet, I've really appreciated your time. It's been a long time coming. I still think there will be scope to get this done in a public context in church with guests and our friends from church coming in and so on, and we could probably do a Q&A as well. But I say you could do a Q&A. But until then, Janet, thanks so much for your time, and I'll see you soon.
Much.
All right.
Okay. Bye.